Hi everyone, Quiveen here from the comfort of my kitchen. In today's video, we are yet again going to be looking into the future, into the reasonably distant future this time, but not quite as far as some previous videos. We will be looking forward into the 2030s, and we will also be looking a few months into the future, forward to November. In this case, I think it's November the 13th. As you may know from having watched some of these videos in the past, I often take suggestions for events in the distant future that are worth taking a look at. And I often have little information other than a date and roughly where to look. And in this instance, I was told to take a look at the sun. So we're going to have a quick look at the sun here in 2032 on the 13th of the 11th. I don't see the moon particularly near the sun, and I don't see any of the planets particularly near the sun either. Now, of course, taking a look at the sun like that without the assistance of a telescope, you would miss anything like the transit of Mercury, for example. I did briefly see Mercury there pop into view. You would miss things like the transit of Mercury or the transit of Venus if you weren't using a telescope or some kind of something to magnify your view and assist you. Let's get rid of the atmosphere and pull back. Okay, there is Mercury. So they are very, very close together specifically on that date, and they are only getting further apart on every other date. If we move into the past, Mercury ends up on the opposite side of the sun, so we'll need to move backwards in time. There's Mercury directly in front of the sun. So there we go. We've got a transit of Mercury coming up in 2032. Transits of Mercury are incredibly rare events, so being able to catch one is a treat. It's a real privilege to see a transit of Mercury. The transit of Mercury looks like it's a pretty long one, which is nice. We can see that Mercury here is quite far from the center of the sun. It's making a chord here almost across the top of the sun, but it isn't just a glancing blow. This is a pretty broad section of the sun. So this transit of Mercury looks like it's going to happen for a while, and it looks like it's going to begin before the sunrise here in Ireland. So let's see. Here we go. Here is around our first and second contacts. There's Mercury lighting up because it's no longer backlit by the sun. So let's take a closer look here. This is 6:40, 20 to 7 in the morning. I guess it's closer to, 6:42 around here. We're getting our first contact when one side of Mercury touches one side of the sun. Then we have the very, very beginning of the transit between first and second contact, with our second contact occurring just around here. And there we go, the second contact beginning and ending when Mercury finally passes in front of the sun just a minute later at around 6:43. So this is before the sun rises for us here in Ireland. If I pull out, I might be able to see roughly by how much. So we can see it's quite a bit under where the horizon would be. These letters should be on the horizon. In fact, I'll demonstrate that. There we go. So the transit begins while Mercury is still very much under the horizon for us here in Ireland. But we can see it gets reasonably high into the sky while the transit is still occurring. And there it is, Mercury still in front of the sun. From 6:43 all the way through to its third contact here at 11:05, 11:06. Ish, we'll say 11:06, making its third contact there, and then its fourth contact, and the transit finally finishing at just there at 11:07. So this transit is going to last for a couple of hours, over 2 hours. We went through time a little bit too quickly there, as you can see, so I'll correct that. So here we are back a little bit closer to the present date, and then of course we'll have to jump all the way forward again. Although in a couple of the past videos, I intended to take a look at multiple events, and I didn't give myself enough time. I got too wrapped up in looking at one event, and maybe we will take a closer look at this transit of Mercury, see where it looks best. We now know it doesn't look best from here in Ireland. But the next date that I was told to take a look at, also in the 2030s, 2039, also in November, but on a different date. So we're going back to November 7th, now in 2039. And I was yet again told to look at the sun, There, it looks like Mercury is, yeah, very much on the far side of the sun. But let's see what we can see around the sun. Okay, all of the planets are off to the side. So Mercury doesn't look particularly illuminated, which would lead me to believe that it's on the wrong side. Maybe it's not on the wrong side of the sun. It's not. We get another transit of Mercury. So two transits of Mercury. Transits of Mercury often come in pairs. Similarly with other transits and things like eclipses, we will occasionally see these things grouped together. But then the gaps between them otherwise can be pretty long. So let's just see, before we check to see if this transit is going to be visible at all from Ireland. It looks like we're here at 10 a.m. with the end of the transit, which means we're only going to see a little bit of the end of the transit from here in Ireland. Yeah, it seems to be making its third contact there at around 10:12 and its fourth contact there at around 10:15. So it does seem to be happening pretty slowly. The length of time that a transit takes doesn't just depend on the motion of the planet that we're seeing transit in front of the sun, but also on the motion of the Earth. And even though the planets don't have particularly elliptical orbits, I mentioned this in my previous video, that even though all of the planets have elliptical orbits, those elliptical orbits aren't very elliptical. There's our second contact at 7:22, and our first contact there at 7:19. So again, a couple of hours worth of transit here. And 7:19, maybe that is after the sun has risen for us here in Ireland. Let's check by pulling back and see where we see those letters. Oh, not quite. So it is still, the beginning of the transit is just barely out of view for us here in Ireland. I mentioned that the planets don't have particularly elliptical orbits. Even though they're not particularly elliptical, they are still a little eccentric. They are a little elliptical, and that means that the planets are moving at different speeds at different parts of their orbit. We will tend to orbit quicker when we're at one side of our orbit, closer to the sun, and then a little bit slower when we're at our furthest from the sun. All of the planets move a little bit faster during perihelion and a little bit slower at aphelion. So we're seeing there sunrise close to 8 o'clock, with Mercury moving across the sun and eventually crossing out the other side when we get a little bit closer to 10 past 10, 11 past 10, when Mercury finally crosses over the sun. It looks like Mercury's pretty close to being at its most inside the sun, the easiest to see with assistance there at 8:40, and I'd say a similar time back in 2032. So even though Ireland isn't the best location to see them, both of these transits are going to be visible. So both of these transits of Mercury are going to be visible from the Earth, and we only have to wait a decade or so for them to happen. Transits of Mercury are more common than the transits of Venus, and this is because Venus takes a lot longer to orbit the sun, so Venus won't be in the right place as often as Mercury. Mercury is going to be roughly in the right place to be directly in front of the sun more often than Venus is. Mercury is what I'm looking for, so let's get rid of the atmosphere there and just grab Mercury. Okay, it looks like here we are. We've moved a little bit further south on the planet. It doesn't like Mercury's going to be in front of the sun for much, much longer from there. Let's try this. Mercury's transits happen more frequently, but they are commonly separated by about a decade. There's roughly a decade between the transits, unless there's only a couple of years between the transits. So in this instance, it looks like Mercury is only going to be making a chord across the bottom of the sun no matter where you are on the planet. But we have one transit in 2039 and another transit in 2032. Those are the pair together, and then the next transit after that is closer to the 2040s and then into the 2050s. Similarly, there was a transit of Mercury in 2019, which I did get to see. With the correct kind of telescope, with solar telescopes, you can take a look at these transits. So the transit of Mercury in 2019, I got to see. There was another transit in 2016, so there was two close together, and then the last one before that was a whole decade back in 2006. So Mercury, as I was saying, we often get two transits reasonably close together, separated by a couple of years or a year or two. But then there's usually a decade or so between the transit or the transit pairs again. So this is the next one. This is the next transit coming up. It looks like it's going to be a good one. I think the 2032 transit might be a little bit better than the 2039 transit, but these aren't particularly far in the future, so of course we can double check then. I hope that you will get to see the transits of Mercury that are coming up in the 2030s. I hope that I get to see the transits of Mercury that are coming up in the 2030s, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do like it. If you enjoyed this content, then please do subscribe to this YouTube channel, and if you'd like to read some of this information, you can check out my website, queevinscontent.ie. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you back here next time.